The 6 resignation letters lay on his desk like accusations, each one signed by a different woman who'd lasted less than a week. Marcus Ashford could buy anything in this city. The penthouse, the view, the silence. But he couldn't buy someone willing to sit on the floor with his son. Daniel was in the corner again, rocking, humming that tune only he understood, while the agency called with one last candidate. "She's not like the others," they warned, as if that were a problem. Marcus looked at his boy, unreachable behind walls no amount of money could break down, and wondered if difference was exactly what they needed, or just another word for failure waiting to happen. The morning light cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 72nd floor penthouse, casting geometric shadows across marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Marcus stood at those windows most mornings, coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the city wake up below him while his own world remained frozen in a silence he didn't know how to break. Behind him, Daniel sat cross-legged in his usual corner, arranging colored blocks in a pattern only he understood, humming softly to himself. The sound was both comforting and heartbreaking, proof his son existed in there somewhere, just beyond Marcus's reach. 3 years since Elena died. 3 years of building his tech empire higher, working longer hours, convincing himself that securing Daniel's financial future was the same as being present in his life. 3 years of hiring specialists, therapists, behavioral consultants, all of whom had degrees from prestigious universities and charged rates that would make most people's eyes water. And in all that time, through all those credentials and sessions and carefully structured interventions, Daniel had only grown more distant, retreating further into his silent world of precise routines and unbreakable patterns. The worst part was watching Daniel's face when Marcus tried to connect. That careful blankness, like a door closing softly but firmly. No anger, no rejection, just absence. As if Marcus were a stranger who happened to live in the same expensive space, providing food and shelter, but nothing Daniel actually needed. Some nights, Marcus stood outside Daniel's bedroom door, listening to his son hum those wordless melodies, and felt a loneliness so profound it made the penthouse's 3,000 square feet feel like a vacuum in space. Last week, he'd made the decision to hire live-in help. The agency had sent their best candidates, young black women with impeccable references, experience in group homes and special education programs, backgrounds that looked perfect on paper. They'd arrived one after another, each confident they could make a difference. The first had tried gentle coaxing, suggesting Daniel could expand his routines just a little. Daniel stopped eating for 18 hours. The second rearranged his blocks, trying to build something with him, and his screams had been primal and terrifying. The others followed in quick succession, growing frustrated when Daniel wouldn't make eye contact, exhausted by rigid routines and lack of response, whispering into phones about the weird kid energy, ultimately apologizing but firm that they couldn't handle it. Each resignation had felt like a small death, another confirmation that his son was unreachable, that Marcus had failed in the most fundamental way a father could fail. Now the 6 letters sat on his desk in his home office, and the agency was calling with what the representative called your last option. Marcus had heard the hesitation in her voice, the unspoken suggestion that maybe it was time to consider residential programs, specialized schools, facilities that could provide round-the-clock care. The kind of places where parents sent children they couldn't handle. The thought made his stomach turn. "Her name is Keisha Williams," the agency rep said. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Ashford. She doesn't have the resume of the others. She's worked in community centers, after-school programs. But she has a nephew on the spectrum, and she specifically requested placement with a special needs child. She's older too, late 30s. Marcus looked at Daniel, who had moved to the window and was pressing his palm against the glass, leaving prints Marcus would normally have cleaned immediately. "Send her," he said. "When can she start?" "Today, if you'd like. She's quite eager." Something about that word, eager, caught Marcus off guard. None of the others had been eager. "Tell her to come at 2 o'clock. At 1:58, the doorman called up. Marcus opened the door to find a woman who was not what he'd expected. She wore jeans and a simple purple sweater, her dark skin glowing in the afternoon light, natural curls pulled back in a practical ponytail. No designer clothes, no attempt to look like she belonged in a building where the monthly maintenance fees exceeded most people's rent. She carried a worn canvas bag over one shoulder and met his eyes with a directness that was somehow neither challenging nor deferential. "Mr. Ashford," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Keisha Williams." Her grip was firm, her palm slightly rough, the hands of someone who actually worked with them. Marcus found himself awkwardly formal, years of business negotiations making him stiff. He led her inside, poured water, and began his practiced speech about Daniel's diagnosis, his routines, his particular needs. But Keisha interrupted gently. "The agency mentioned you're looking for live-in help. Full-time?" When Marcus confirmed and named a salary that made her eyebrows rise slightly, she set down her glass. "Mr. Ashford, I can't promise I'm magic, and I won't lie to you. If this doesn't work out, if I'm genuinely not able to provide the care Daniel needs, I'll tell you honestly. But I can promise I won't quit because it's hard. Hard is kind of my specialty." She smiled, a small thing that didn't quite reach her eyes, but held something real in it. "My nephew, Isaiah, he's 12 now. When he was Daniel's age, he went through a phase where he'd only wear clothes that were inside out. Did that for 8 months straight. But eventually he moved past it. Not because we fought him or tried to force normal on him, because we learned to meet him where he was." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Would you like to meet Daniel?" "I'd like that very much. But Mr. Ashford, let me observe first. Don't introduce me. Don't explain. Just let me see his world for a bit." He led her to the living room where Daniel had returned to his corner, the blocks spread before him in a pattern Marcus had seen 100 times, but never understood. Red, blue, yellow, green. 4 colors, 7 blocks each, arranged in descending size order. Keisha settled herself on the couch, not close to Daniel, but not across the room either. She didn't try to catch his eye, didn't speak. She simply sat, her posture relaxed, and after a moment, she pulled out her phone and scrolled silently. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, so softly Marcus almost missed it, Keisha began to hum. A melody, simple and repetitive. Not the same tune Daniel hummed, but in a similar cadence, the same gentle rhythm. Daniel's hands, reaching for the blocks to begin the pattern again, paused. His head tilted, the movement almost imperceptible. Keisha kept humming, kept scrolling her phone as if unaware of the shift in the room's energy. Slowly, so slowly, Marcus's heart ached watching it. Daniel's hand lowered. He didn't look at Keisha, didn't acknowledge her presence in any obvious way, but he sat there, blocks untouched, and listened. After a moment, his own hum joined hers, not in harmony, but alongside 2 separate melodies occupying the same space without colliding. Marcus couldn't find words. He'd watched 6 women try every technique in their training to engage Daniel, and in 10 minutes this woman had done something none of them had managed. She'd made his son pause, made him listen, made him, for just a moment, share space with another human being. Keisha stood up, smooth and unhurried, and walked back to where Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. "He's got a good ear," she said quietly. "That's a gift, recognizing patterns in sound like that." How did you know to do that? I didn't know. I guessed. Keisha met his eyes. Mr. Ashford, can I be honest with you? Those other women, I'm sure they were qualified. I'm sure they knew all the right approaches. But sometimes what a child needs isn't someone who knows the textbook answers. It's someone willing to sit in the not knowing and just be present, without an agenda, without trying to fix or change or improve. I need him to improve, Marcus said, and was surprised by how raw his voice sounded. He has a life. It's just different from the one you imagined. Keisha's expression was compassionate, but firm. And yes, we can work on skills, on communication, on expanding his comfort zone. But first, he needs to trust that someone sees him, really sees him, exactly as he is, not as a problem to solve. Marcus looked back at his son, still absorbed in his blocks, and felt something crack open in his chest. A grief he'd been holding at bay for 3 years, wrapped in work and money and the desperate need to control something, anything. When can you start? I can start right now, if you'd like. I'm going to need you to trust me. Trust the process, even when it seems like nothing's happening. Can you do that? Marcus thought about the 6 resignation letters on his desk, thought about Daniel's hand pressed against the window glass, reaching for something Marcus couldn't see. Yes, I can try. Trying's enough, Keisha said. Now, why don't you show me Daniel's routine? I need to learn his world before I can be part of it. The next morning, Marcus woke to sounds he couldn't quite identify. He followed the noise to the kitchen, stopping in the doorway at a scene that made his throat tight. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, not in his usual spot, but pulled up close to where Keisha worked at the counter. She wasn't cooking anything fancy, just scrambling eggs in a pan, but she was narrating every action in a low, steady voice. Eggs need medium heat. Too hot and they get rubbery. Not hot enough and they get watery. It's all about finding the right temperature. She used a spatula to fold the eggs gently. My grandma taught me this. She said cooking is like music. It's got rhythm, timing. She glanced over her shoulder at Daniel, who was watching her hands with intense focus. What do you think? Does that look right? Daniel didn't answer, of course, but he leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracking the movement of the spatula. Keisha nodded as if he'd spoken. She plated the eggs and sat down with her own breakfast. But she didn't put Daniel's usual nuggets in front of him right away. I'm going to eat now, she announced. You've got your nuggets if you want them. Marcus watched, confused. This wasn't the routine. But even as his instinct was to intervene, he forced himself to stay silent. Trust the process. Daniel looked at his plate of chicken nuggets, looked at Keisha's eggs. Then, in a movement so subtle, Marcus almost missed it, he reached out and touched the edge of Keisha's plate. She didn't react, just kept eating. Daniel picked up one of his nuggets and ate it in his precise way. But his eyes kept returning to Keisha's plate, to the different food, the different routine. Good morning, Mr. Ashford, Keisha said without looking up. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Marcus poured coffee and sat down at the table, the first time in months he'd eaten breakfast at home. Daniel's eyes flicked to him, then away, then back. A moment of recognition. My father is here. When was the last time Marcus had been present enough to notice? The 3 of them sat in silence, eating. Not comfortable exactly, but not unbearable either. After a while, Keisha started humming again. Daniel's humming joined hers, and Marcus found himself listening to the layered sound, trying to understand the language his son spoke when words failed. Over the following days and weeks, a rhythm emerged. Marcus started working from home more, watching Keisha's patient presence and Daniel's slow, cautious responses. She never pushed, never tried to force engagement. She simply existed in Daniel's space, narrating her actions, offering observations without expectation. I'm going to dust the living room now. Might move some things, just so you know. And she would wait, giving Daniel time to process, to prepare himself. Marcus noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The way Daniel's shoulders would tense when unexpected sounds occurred. How Keisha would quietly name the sound. Garbage truck. Tuesday morning. Always comes at 9. Giving Daniel context, making the chaos of the world slightly more predictable. The small rituals she created, like waving to the window each morning, establishing patterns Daniel could anticipate and rely on. The breakthrough came on a quiet afternoon when Marcus arrived home early. He heard Keisha's voice in the living room, speaking softly. She sat on the floor near Daniel's corner, a photo album open on her lap, showing pictures to no one in particular. "This is my nephew Isaiah when he was 7. See? He's lining up all his toy cars. Had to be in rainbow order. If you messed it up, he'd start over from the beginning." She turned a page. "This one's from his first day at his new school. See his face? He was terrified, but his teacher let him bring his cars to class, and eventually he started listening to the lessons while he organized them. Found his own way to learn." Daniel wasn't looking at the album. He was arranging his blocks as always, but Marcus could see the change in his son's posture, the way his hands moved slightly slower, listening, processing, understanding that someone else had walked a path similar to his. "Isaiah's doing good now," Keisha continued. "Still lines things up sometimes when he's stressed. Still doesn't like surprises much. But he's got friends, goes to regular school, even joined the chess club because turns out chess is all about patterns, and he's brilliant at patterns." She closed the album. "Different doesn't mean less. It just means different." Marcus backed away before they could notice him, went to his office and sat at his desk with his hands over his face. How many thousands of dollars had he spent on therapists, all focused on fixing Daniel? And this woman, with her worn photo album and her quiet stories, was teaching his son something more fundamental, that he wasn't broken. That evening, after Daniel was in bed, Marcus found Keisha in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's meals. He poured himself a drink and offered her water. "Can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? You could work anywhere. Why here? Why Daniel?" Keisha was quiet for a moment. "Can I be really honest with you? Please." "I grew up poor. Not just tight money poor, but choosing between food and heat poor. My mama worked 3 jobs, and we still barely made rent most months." She looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. "When Isaiah was diagnosed, my sister couldn't afford the fancy therapies. She had to figure it out on her own, and I watched that brilliant little boy almost get lost in the system because we didn't have the money to fight for him." Marcus felt something uncomfortable shifting in his chest. "So when the agency told me about a billionaire looking for help with his autistic son, I thought, here's a kid who'll never want for resources. But you know what? I've been here almost a week now, and I've realized Daniel's got the same thing Isaiah had. A parent who loves him desperately but doesn't know how to reach him. And all the money in the world doesn't fix that. Only time and patience and presence fix that." "I work too much," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "You work the amount someone who's running from grief works," Keisha said, and her bluntness should have stung but somehow didn't. "I'm not judging. Everyone handles loss differently. But Mr. Ashford, Daniel's still here. He's still your son. And he needs you present way more than he needs you successful." Marcus took a drink, felt the burn, welcomed it. "I don't know how to be what he needs." "None of us do. That's the secret. There's no manual for this. You just show up and try and fail and try again." Keisha smiled. "But here's the thing. You've been home for breakfast 3 times this week. That's 3 more times than the week before. You're already doing better." The months passed, each bringing small changes. Daniel sitting closer to Marcus during meals, his chair gradually migrating until they were nearly side by side. Bringing his blocks to the living room when Marcus worked from home, setting up his patterns within eyeshot. Once, when Marcus sneezed, Daniel looked over with what might have been concern in his eyes. Marcus learned to read the subtle signs of Daniel's moods, the tension in his shoulders that meant overload was approaching, the specific quality of his humming that indicated contentment versus anxiety. He started documenting these moments, taking mental photographs. Daniel's hand reaching toward his during a thunderstorm, not quite touching but seeking proximity. The way his son would sometimes stand at the window where Marcus stood, mimicking his posture, sharing the view. 2 months in, the first real crisis hit. Marcus was on a conference call when he heard the scream. He rushed to the living room to find Daniel in full meltdown, his body rigid, hands pressed over his ears, that terrible sound tearing from his throat. Keisha was backing away slowly, her hands up. "What happened?" "The blocks," Keisha said, her voice shaking. "I was vacuuming. I didn't see them on the floor. I kicked them, gattered them." Daniel's screaming intensified. He began rocking, hitting his fists against his thighs. Marcus moved toward his son, but Keisha touched his arm. "Let me. Please. I caused it. Let me try." Every instinct told Marcus to intervene, but something in Keisha's face made him step back. She approached Daniel slowly, not trying to touch him, not speaking over his screams. She simply sat down on the floor and waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Daniel's screaming began to have gaps in it. When one of those gaps came, Keisha spoke. "I made a mistake. I wasn't being careful. I'm sorry." She pulled the scattered blocks toward her, began arranging them by color. "I'm putting them here. Red ones, blue ones, yellow ones, green ones. They're safe. They're okay. I'll leave them right here for you." Daniel's rocking slowed. His fists stopped hitting. The screaming became a keening whimper that was somehow worse, but Keisha stayed calm. She finished sorting the blocks, pushed them gently toward Daniel's space, and then moved back. Gave him room. "I'm going to stand up now and step away. The blocks are there when you're ready. I won't touch them again without asking first." It took another 15 minutes before Daniel's breathing settled, before he uncurled slightly and looked at the sorted blocks. Another 5 before he reached for them with shaking hands and began reconstructing his pattern. Later that night, Marcus found Keisha sitting in the kitchen with her head in her hands. "He's okay," he said. "It happens. It's happened with me more times than I can count. But you're his father. I'm supposed to be the professional here. Nobody knows how to handle this," Marcus said. "We're all just doing our best. The difference is you haven't given up after a week." Keisha looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "I almost did. When I heard him screaming like that, knowing I caused it, I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But then I thought about Isaiah, and how many times my sister wanted to give up, and how glad I am that she didn't. Daniel doesn't need another person teaching him that he's too much, too difficult, not worth the effort." Marcus felt something crack wider in his chest. "Can I tell you something I've never said out loud? When Elena died, there was a part of me that was relieved. Not that she was gone. Never that. But that I wouldn't have to watch her manage Daniel anymore. Wouldn't have to see how effortlessly she understood him when I couldn't. Wouldn't have to feel like a failure as a father every single day." He couldn't look at Keisha. "And then she was gone, and I realized I'd lost the one person who knew how to reach our son. That all those times I'd relied on her, I'd been robbing myself of the chance to build my own relationship with Daniel. And now it's too late." "Mr. Ashford," Keisha said gently, "the window's not closed. It's just harder to open now. That's different. You're here. You're trying. You're showing up. That matters. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, you've made more progress in 2 months than I have in 3 years. I'm not his father. The standard's different. Keisha wrapped her hands around her water glass. You know what I see when I watch you with Daniel? I see a man who's terrified of failing his son, so terrified that he's been paralyzed. But these past weeks, I've seen you moving through that fear. That's not nothing, Mr. Ashford. That's courage. Teach me, Marcus said, his voice rough. Not the big things, not the therapy approaches. Just teach me how to be present with him, how to sit in his space without needing him to perform, how to see him. That's the easiest and hardest thing in the world, Keisha said. You ready? No, but I need to try anyway. She taught him about parallel play, existing alongside Daniel in separate activities, but shared space. Marcus would sit on the floor with his laptop, working while Daniel arranged his blocks nearby. At first, the silence felt awkward, pressing, but gradually he began to understand what Keisha meant about presence without agenda. He was there. Daniel knew he was there, and that was enough. One morning, 3 weeks later, something shifted. Marcus was responding to emails at the kitchen table while Keisha made breakfast, and Daniel sat in his usual spot, humming. Without thinking, Marcus started humming along. Not Daniel's tune exactly, but harmonizing with it. He didn't realize what he was doing until the humming stopped. All of it. The silence was so sudden and complete that Marcus looked up, startled. Daniel was staring at him. Direct eye contact, sustained, deliberate. Marcus froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. They looked at each other across the table, and Marcus saw something in Daniel's eyes he'd almost forgotten existed. Recognition. Not just awareness, but as his father, as someone who mattered. Then Daniel did something that made Marcus's chest tighten so hard he thought he might stop breathing. His son picked up a blue block from the collection he always kept nearby, stood up, walked around the table, each step deliberate, considered, and placed the block next to Marcus's laptop. Then he walked back to his seat, sat down, and resumed humming as if nothing had happened. Marcus stared at the blue block. A perfect cube, worn smooth at the edges from constant handling. Daniel's favorite color, his most touched block. And he'd given it to Marcus. An offering. A bridge. Keisha, who'd been watching from the stove, had tears streaming down her face. That's connection, she whispered. That's his way of saying he sees you, too. Marcus picked up the block with shaking hands. Such a simple object. But in that moment, it was worth more than everything else he owned combined. Thank you, buddy. Thank you. Daniel didn't respond, didn't look up. But his humming changed, became slightly louder, slightly more rhythmic, content. And Marcus sat there with a blue block in his palm and tears running unchecked down his face. 4 months after Keisha's arrival, Marcus received a call from his business partner about an opportunity in Singapore, a deal that could expand their company into Asian markets, worth potentially hundreds of millions. But it would require Marcus to relocate for 6 months. The old Marcus would have been on a plane within 24 hours. The new Marcus felt physically ill at the thought. I need to think about it, he told his partner, who responded with stunned silence. Think fast. This won't wait. That evening, Marcus told Keisha about the Singapore offer. He'd expected her to immediately tell him not to go. Instead, she was quiet. What do you want to do? She finally asked. I want to stay, but this is what I've built my entire adult life around. And this deal, it could secure Daniel's financial future for generations. His financial future's already secure, Mr. Ashford. Keisha's voice was gentle but uncompromising. So what's really pulling you toward Singapore? Marcus sat with the question. Because it's easier. Because I know how to negotiate deals. Because I understand that world. And this, he gestured toward Daniel's closed bedroom door, this terrifies me. What if I keep trying and it's never enough? At least in Singapore, I'd have clear metrics for success. And you'd miss every morning Daniel scoots his chair closer to yours. You'd miss the next block he decides to share. You'd miss the moment when he looks at you and decides you're safe enough to trust completely. Keisha set down her tea. I can't tell you what to do, but you've spent 3 years running. And these past months, you've been standing still. Really ask yourself which version of you wants to go to Singapore. At 3 in the morning, Marcus heard it. Daniel's humming, coming from his bedroom. He got up, padded quietly to Daniel's door, eased it open. Daniel sat in his bed, the weighted blanket around his shoulders, humming in the darkness. Without overthinking it, Marcus sat down in the doorway. He started humming, too. Daniel's tune, as close as he could match it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Daniel's humming shifted, adjusting to harmonize with Marcus's less skilled attempt. They hummed together in the darkness, father and son, speaking the only language that worked for both of them. And Marcus knew what he needed to do. The next morning he called his partner. I'm not taking the Singapore deal. Send the team without me. You're kidding. I'm not. There are more important things than deals right now. And as he said it, watching Daniel methodically arrange his breakfast, with Keisha humming softly at the stove, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. His partner tried arguing. Marcus listened, understanding the concerns because he'd shared them once, but they felt distant now. I trust your judgment. Handle it however you think is best. But I'm staying here. Daniel, who'd been focused on his food, looked up, made direct eye contact with Marcus, held it for 3 seconds, then went back to eating. But the message was clear. I noticed. It matters. The weeks that followed brought more small miracles. Daniel began helping in the kitchen, handing Keisha specific utensils she named, following simple one-step instructions. He started attending a special needs program 2 mornings a week, a transition that took months of preparation, but one he ultimately accepted because both Marcus and Keisha were there for drop-off, creating a bridge between home and school. 6 months after Keisha arrived, during Daniel's bedtime routine, Marcus was tucking him in when his son grabbed his hand. The touch was so unexpected, Marcus froze. Daniel had never initiated touch before. Never. And then, in a voice rusty from disuse, Daniel said the word that shattered and rebuilt Marcus's entire world. Dada. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Elena had told him not to expect it, had said that some children on the spectrum didn't use familial terms. Marcus had accepted that, or thought he had, but hearing it now, it destroyed him in the best possible way. Yeah, buddy, he managed, his voice breaking. Yeah. I'm Dada. I'm here. Daniel closed his eyes, exhausted, but his hand squeezed Marcus's once before releasing. And Marcus sat there in the growing darkness, replaying that one word over and over like a prayer. Over the following months, Daniel slowly, hesitantly began to use more words. Not many. He'd never be a chatty child. But he started labeling things that mattered. Block. Blue. Hungry. And occasionally, when Marcus tucked him in at night, Dada. Each word felt like a miracle. Marcus took Daniel to the park one quiet weekday morning. They went slowly, Marcus carrying Daniel's favorite blocks as a security object. Daniel held on to Marcus's hand the entire walk. At the playground, Daniel watched for 5 minutes, processing, before walking toward the swings. He stood in front of one, studying it, then looked at Marcus. A question. "Want me to push you?" Marcus asked, and Daniel nodded. Marcus positioned Daniel on the swing, his heart pounding. This was so ordinary, a father pushing his son on a swing. But for Marcus, it felt revolutionary. He pushed gently, and after a few pushes, something in Daniel relaxed. His humming started, and his legs began to kick, instinctively pumping. A little girl on the next swing looked over. "Hi, I'm Sophia." Daniel didn't respond, kept humming, kept swinging, but Sophia just shrugged and went back to her own swinging. After a moment she started humming too, her own tune. Two children, swinging side by side, humming different melodies that somehow didn't clash. When it was time to go, Daniel walked back to the car willingly, his hand finding Marcus's. In the car, Marcus caught Daniel's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Did you have fun at the park?" Daniel looked out the window, quiet, then soft but clear. Fun. Marcus had to pull over because his eyes were too blurred with tears to drive safely. 1 year after Keisha's arrival, Marcus gathered them both at the kitchen table. "I need to talk to both of you about something important." When Keisha tensed, he hastened to add, "Nothing bad. Actually, I hope it's good." He took a breath. "Keisha, you've been living here for a year now, but your room is the small one off the kitchen, and that's not fair. I'd like to make this permanent, not just as Daniel's caregiver, but as part of our family. The guest suite on the 3rd floor is yours if you want it." Keisha's eyes widened. "Marcus, that's incredibly generous, but I need to know, is this about Daniel, or is this about something else?" "It's about all of us," he said. "You've changed our lives, both of us, and somewhere along the way you became essential, not just to Daniel's care, but to this family existing at all." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything to change between us. I'm not assuming anything. I just want you to know that you're not hired help anymore. You're family." Daniel, who'd been listening intently, got up from the table. He walked to Keisha, stood in front of her, and very carefully placed both his hands on her arm. His version of a hug. "Stay," he said, clear as a bell. "Keisha, stay." Keisha covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. "You don't play fair," she told Daniel. "How am I supposed to say no to that?" "Is that a yes?" Marcus asked. "That's a yes. Of course that's a yes. I love this kid. I love this family. Both of you. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel made his content, humming sound and returned to his seat, picking up his blue block, satisfied. Marcus and Keisha looked at each other across the table, and something passed between them. A deep understanding, a partnership forged through daily care and small miracles. Marcus also set up legal arrangements to ensure Keisha's role in Daniel's life was protected, establishing joint guardianship and creating security for her family. When his sister visited and saw the changes in Daniel, she hugged Marcus fiercely and whispered, "I was wrong. I pushed for those programs because I thought you couldn't do this. But you did." Several months later, the agency called asking for a reference for Keisha. Marcus picked up the phone. "Let me tell you, you sent me 6 qualified professionals and my son rejected them all. Then you sent me Keisha, who you seemed almost apologetic about, who didn't have the credentials of the others. And she changed our lives. She's not just Daniel's caregiver. She's family. Legal guardian, essential part of our home. The person who taught both of us how to be human again." "So, you'd recommend her?" "I'd recommend you reconsider what qualifications actually matter. Credentials are fine, but the ability to see a child, really see them, to be present without agenda, that's what changes lives. And it's not something you can put on a resume." That evening, Marcus walked to Daniel's room, where his son was arranging blocks in an increasingly complex pattern. "Hey buddy, can I come in?" Daniel looked up, considered, then nodded. Marcus entered, invited into his son's space, trusted in his world. After a while, Daniel paused, looked at Marcus and said, "Dada stay?" It was a question now, an invitation. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick. "Dada stay, always." And he meant it. Through meltdowns and breakthroughs, through hard days and small victories, through all the beautiful, messy complexity of loving a child who saw the world differently, he would stay. He would be present. Because in the end, Marcus Ashford had learned the most important lesson of all. Success wasn't measured in billions or achievements. It was measured in mornings where your son scooted his chair closer, in blocks carefully shared, in the word Dada spoken with trust and love. He'd fired 6 maids in a week, desperate and failing. But the 7th, a black woman with kind eyes and a patient heart who'd stayed when others left, who'd seen possibility where others saw difficulty. She'd given him back his son. She'd given him back himself. The blue block remained on Marcus's desk, a permanent reminder. And every day, as he watched Daniel and Keisha in their comfortable routines, as he joined them for breakfast and evening rituals, as he felt his son's small hand trust his larger one, Marcus understood. This was wealth, this connection, this presence, this love. This was everything that mattered. And it had taken losing almost everything to understand that this moment, this family, this home, was the only fortune worth having.